The blood on Eleanor Sterling's wedding dress wasn't hers, but the cold December wind cutting through her as she stumbled through the Colorado mountains threatened to finish what the outlaws had started. She had been traveling with a wagon train from Missouri to California, a 19-year-old woman seeking a teaching position in Sacramento, when the raiders struck 2 days ago near the Kansas border. They had murdered the wagon master, scattered the travelers, and taken everything of value. Eleanor had run into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a small leather satchel containing her mother's Bible and a few letters. She had been wearing her mother's wedding dress, planning to have it altered when she reached California, never imagining it would become her salvation and nearly her shroud. For 2 days she had walked west, following the mountains, knowing only that she needed to find civilization before the winter cold claimed her. The dress, though heavy with layers of silk and lace, was never meant for a Colorado winter. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, and her lips held a blue tinge that frightened her when she caught her reflection in a frozen stream. The snow began falling as darkness approached on that second evening, thick flakes that obscured her vision and made each step treacherous. Eleanor knew she was dying. She had read enough books, heard enough stories, to know that the drowsiness creeping over her was not rest but death's gentle invitation. She wanted to lie down in the snow, to close her eyes and let the cold take her, but something in her spirit refused to surrender. That was when she saw the light. At first, she thought it was heaven, a golden glow through the swirling snow. But as she forced her frozen legs forward, she realized it was a lamp burning in the window of a small cabin nestled against the mountainside. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could smell wood burning. With the last of her strength, Eleanor stumbled to the door and pounded on it with numb fists. The door opened, and she fell forward into the arms of a man who caught her with surprising gentleness for someone so large. Through her blurred vision, she saw a face weathered by sun and wind, dark eyes filled with concern, and brown hair that needed cutting. He was saying something, but her ears were ringing too loudly to hear. "Miss, can you hear me? Miss, stay awake now." His voice finally broke through the fog in her mind. Eleanor tried to speak, but her lips would not form words. The man lifted her as if she weighed nothing and carried her into the cabin. The warmth hit her like a physical blow, and she gasped. "Easy now," he said, setting her down in a chair near the fireplace. "Too much heat too fast will hurt you. We need to warm you slowly." He moved with practiced efficiency, wrapping blankets around her shoulders, removing her frozen shoes to reveal feet that had lost all color. She watched through half-closed eyes as he filled a basin with lukewarm water and gently placed her feet in it. The sensation of feeling returning was excruciating, and she cried out. "I know it hurts," he said softly, "but it means you'll keep your toes. That's good. You're going to be all right." Eleanor finally managed to focus on her rescuer. He was perhaps 25 or 26, tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean strength of a man who worked hard for his living. His clothes were simple but clean, dark wool pants, a heavy cotton shirt, and a leather vest. A gun belt hung on a peg near the door, but he wore no weapon now. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Name's Gideon Zimmerman," he replied, checking her hands with gentle fingers. "Most folks call me Zim. This is my cabin. Been here about 3 years now, working a small mining claim up the mountain." "What's your name?" Eleanor Sterling. "I was with a wagon train. We were attacked." His expression darkened. "How long ago?" 2 days. "Near the Kansas border, I think. I've been walking." 2 days in this weather with no proper clothing. Gideon shook his head in amazement. "You must be made of steel under all that silk. That's a wedding dress, isn't it?" Eleanor looked down at the ruined garment, stained with blood and mud, torn at the hem. "It was my mother's." She died last year. I was taking it to California with me. You're a long way from California, Miss Sterling. I know. I got turned around in the storm. I just kept walking. Gideon stood and moved to the stove, where he ladled soup from a pot into a tin bowl. You need to eat something. Not too much at first, just enough to warm your insides. The soup was simple beef broth with vegetables, but to Eleanor it tasted like the finest meal she had ever eaten. She sipped slowly, feeling strength gradually returning to her body. As sensation returned to her extremities, the pain intensified, but she bore it stoically. Where are we exactly? She asked between sips. About 15 miles north of Montrose, Colorado. It's a small mining town in the valley. I go down once a month for supplies and to sell whatever gold I've found. You live here alone. Just me and my mule, Otis. He's in the lean-to out back. Not much for conversation, but he's dependable. Despite her exhaustion and pain, Eleanor found herself smiling. There was something calming about Gideon Zimmerman, a quiet competence that made her feel safe for the first time in days. I hate to impose, she said, but I have nowhere to go. Is there a town nearby where I could find work? I'm a teacher. I have references. Gideon settled into a chair across from her, his long legs stretched toward the fire. Montrose is growing. They just built a schoolhouse last year. The teacher they hired didn't last through the winter. Couldn't handle the isolation. The position might still be open. How would I get there? The storm should break by morning. If you're strong enough, I can take you down on Otis. It's a full day's journey, but the path is clear enough if we go slowly. Eleanor nodded, relief flooding through her. Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. You saved my life. Zim, he corrected. And you saved yourself by making it to my door. Now you need to rest. You can have the bed. I'll sleep by the fire. I couldn't take your bed. You can and you will. You've been through hell, Miss Sterling. Let me do this small kindness. She was too exhausted to argue further. Gideon helped her to the narrow bed in the corner of the cabin, piling blankets on top of her. Eleanor's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she had never felt safer than she did in this small cabin with a stranger named Gideon Zimmerman watching over her. She woke once in the night, disoriented and afraid, her dreams filled with gunfire and screaming. Gideon was there immediately, kneeling beside the bed with a lamp in his hand. You're safe, he said quietly. Just a nightmare. You're safe here. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, warm and steady, and Eleanor felt her racing heart begin to slow. She nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat, and he returned to his bedroll by the fire. But she noticed he left the lamp burning low on the table, a small beacon against the darkness. Morning arrived with brilliant sunshine sparkling on fresh snow. Eleanor woke to find Gideon already up, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast. Her feet were still sore, but the dangerous numbness was gone. Her hands tingled but responded when she flexed her fingers. How do you feel? Gideon asked, noticing she was awake. Better. Sore, but better. That's good. I've been thinking about your situation. The journey to Montrose is rough on a good day. In this snow, with you already weakened, it could be dangerous. I think we should wait a few days, let you recover your strength. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden. Besides, it will give me time to get word to the sheriff about the attack on your wagon train. There's a line shack about 3 miles south. The ranch hands check it regularly. I can leave a message there. Eleanor sat up slowly, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. The cabin looked different in daylight, less like a rough shelter and more like a home. Books lined a shelf on one wall, and she saw a violin case tucked in the corner. The space was clean and well organized, everything in its place. You play the violin? She asked. Gideon glanced at the case and shrugged. My mother taught me. It gets lonely up here in the winter. Music helps. I'd like to hear you play sometime. Maybe tonight if you're feeling up to it." They fell into an easy routine over the following days. Gideon would tend to his morning chores, checking on Otis and bringing in firewood, while Eleanor helped prepare meals and tidy the cabin. Her strength returned gradually, and with it came a growing awareness of the man who had saved her life. Gideon Zimmerman was unlike anyone Eleanor had ever met. He was educated, she discovered, the son of German immigrants who had valued learning above all else. His father had been a jeweler in St. Louis before gold fever had brought the family west. Both parents had died of cholera 5 years ago, leaving Gideon alone at 21 with nothing but his father's tools and his mother's violin. "I tried city life," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "Worked in Denver for a year, apprenticing with a watchmaker. Good work, steady pay, but I couldn't breathe in all that noise and smoke. I needed space, silence. So I came up here, filed a claim, and started digging. You find much gold, enough to live on. I'm not getting rich, but I don't need much. This cabin, my mule, my books. It's enough." "Don't you get lonely?" Gideon was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "Sometimes. Especially in winter when I can't get down to town for weeks at a time. But loneliness is better than feeling trapped." Eleanor understood that feeling. She had felt trapped in Missouri, in the small house she had shared with her aunt after her parents died, expected to marry the banker's son and live a life of quiet desperation. Teaching in California had seemed like freedom, but now she wondered if she had been running towards something or simply running away. On the third evening, Gideon took down his violin and played for her. The music was haunting and beautiful, filling the cabin with melody that seemed to dance with the firelight. Eleanor closed her eyes and let the notes wash over her, feeling tears slip down her cheeks without quite knowing why. When the last note faded, Gideon lowered the instrument and looked at her with concern. "I didn't mean to make you sad." "You didn't. It's beautiful. It's just been so long since I heard music, since I felt anything but afraid." He set the violin aside and moved to sit beside her on the bench near the fire. "Tell me about the attack. You don't have to if you don't want to, but sometimes it helps to speak of these things." So Eleanor told him. She described the wagon train, the families traveling together, the hope and excitement that had carried them west. She told him about the morning the raiders came, how they had appeared without warning, their faces covered with bandanas. The wagon master had tried to negotiate, but they had shot him down without mercy. The other men had fought back, but they were farmers and shopkeepers, not gunfighters. The battle had been brief and brutal. "I hid under a wagon," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "I could see everything. The blood, the bodies. A woman named Sarah was sheltering her children, and one of the raiders shot her just for the wedding ring on her finger. I knew if they found me, I would die too. So when they were distracted with looting, I ran." Gideon's hand found hers, warm and strong. "You survived. That's what matters. But what about the others? The children? I just left them." "You did what you had to do to stay alive. There's no shame in that." They sat in silence for a long time, hands clasped, watching the fire burn low. Eleanor felt something shifting inside her, a connection forming that went beyond gratitude or circumstance. When she finally looked at Gideon, she found him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "I should check on Otis," he said abruptly, pulling his hand away and standing. "He gets nervous in storms." But there was no storm, and Eleanor knew he was running from whatever had passed between them. She let him go, understanding that some things needed time. By the 5th day, Eleanor was strong enough to walk outside. The world was transformed by snow, everything white and pristine, the air so clean and cold it hurt to breathe. Gideon showed her the mine entrance, a dark opening in the mountainside supported by heavy timbers. I work it alone, he explained. Dig out a few buckets of ore each day, crush it, pan it for gold. It's hard work, but honest. Will you keep mining forever? I don't know. I've saved a fair amount. Been thinking about buying land in the valley, starting a ranch. But that seems like a dream for someone else, not me. Why not you? Gideon kicked at the snow, not meeting her eyes. A ranch is for a family man, not for someone who lives alone on a mountain. Eleanor wanted to say more, to ask what he truly wanted, but the moment passed. They walked back to the cabin in companionable silence, and she tried to ignore the growing awareness that leaving this place was going to hurt far more than she had anticipated. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Gideon said, "The weather's been clear for 3 days. If you're ready, we could leave for Montrose tomorrow. I got word from the ranch hands that the sheriff knows about the attack. They've been looking for survivors." Eleanor's hands stilled on the potato she was peeling. "Tomorrow, unless you need more time to recover." "No, I'm ready." But she was not ready, not at all. The thought of leaving this cabin, of leaving Gideon, filled her with an ache she did not fully understand. They packed supplies that evening, making ready for the journey. Eleanor borrowed a pair of Gideon's smaller pants and a heavy coat, as her ruined dress was impossible to travel in. She looked at herself in the small mirror over the wash basin and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face was thinner, her eyes haunted, but there was also a strength there that had not existed before. They started before dawn, with Eleanor sitting behind Gideon on Otis, her arms wrapped around his waist. The mule was steady and sure-footed, picking his way down the mountain trail without hesitation. The journey took most of the day, stopping periodically to rest Otis and eat the food Gideon had packed. As they descended, the landscape changed from pristine wilderness to scattered homesteads and finally to the outskirts of Montrose. The town was larger than Eleanor had expected, with a main street lined with businesses and several residential streets branching off. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and she could hear the sound of hammering from what looked like new construction. Gideon guided Otis to a neat white house on the edge of town. A sign in the yard read, "Sheriff's Office and Residence." A man in his 40s stepped onto the porch as they approached, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "Gideon Zimmerman," the sheriff said with a smile. "Haven't seen you in weeks. Who's your companion?" "Sheriff Morrison, this is Miss Eleanor Sterling. She's a survivor from that wagon train attack." The sheriff's expression turned serious. "Miss Sterling, I'm mighty glad to see you alive. We found the site 3 days ago. It was bad. Come inside and warm up. You'll need to tell me everything you remember." Eleanor spent the next hour recounting her story to Sheriff Morrison and his wife, Judith, a kind woman who insisted on making tea and providing fresh clothes. The sheriff took careful notes, asking detailed questions about the raiders' appearance and anything they might have said. "We've had reports of this gang working the trails east of here," Morrison said grimly. "They're vicious and organized. We'll keep hunting them, Miss Sterling. I promise you that." Judith Morrison took Eleanor under her wing immediately. "You'll stay with us until you get settled. The schoolhouse position is still open. The town council has been desperate to fill it. You have references." Eleanor produced the letters from her satchel, now somewhat worse for wear but still legible. Judith read them with growing enthusiasm. "These are excellent. I'll speak to the council members tomorrow. I'm certain they'll hire you on the spot." That evening, Eleanor had a real bath for the first time in over a week and dressed in a borrowed dress that Judith provided. When she came downstairs for dinner, she found Gideon still there, talking quietly with the sheriff. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered in his eyes that made her blush. "You clean up real nice, Miss Sterling," Sheriff Morrison said with a grin. Doesn't she, Zim?" "She does indeed," Gideon said quietly. Dinner was lively, with the Morrisons telling stories about Montrose and its residents. They had 2 children, both grown and living in Denver, and clearly enjoyed having young people in their home. Eleanor found herself laughing for the first time in what felt like forever, caught up in the warmth and normalcy of family life. After dinner, Gideon stood to leave. "I should head back before it gets too late. Otis doesn't like traveling in the dark." Eleanor walked him to the door, suddenly not wanting him to go. They stood on the porch in the cold night air, their breath making clouds between them. "Thank you," Eleanor said, "for everything. You saved my life, Gideon." "You're a survivor, Eleanor. You saved yourself." "I just gave you a warm place to rest." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, anything at all, you send word. I come to town every few weeks for supplies." "I will." He mounted Otis and rode into the darkness, and Eleanor stood on the porch watching until she could no longer see him. Judith Morrison came out and wrapped a shawl around Eleanor's shoulders. "That's a good man," Judith said softly. "Been alone too long, if you ask me. Needs someone to remind him that life is meant to be shared." Eleanor said nothing, but her heart echoed the sentiment. The town council hired Eleanor the very next morning. The school had 17 students ranging from 6 to 15, and she started work immediately. The schoolhouse was a simple building with a wood stove and rows of desks, but to Eleanor it was a sanctuary. Teaching gave her purpose and helped quiet the nightmares that still plagued her sleep. She moved into a small room behind the schoolhouse, barely more than a closet with a bed and a stove, but it was hers. The townspeople were kind and welcoming, grateful to have a teacher who seemed likely to stay. The children were eager to learn, even the older ones who had missed years of schooling. Eleanor threw herself into her work, preparing lessons each evening, visiting students' families on weekends, organizing a Christmas program. But no matter how busy she kept herself, she could not stop thinking about Gideon Zimmerman alone in his cabin on the mountain. 3 weeks passed before he came to town again. Eleanor was walking home from school on a Friday afternoon when she saw Otis tied up outside the general store. Her heart began to race, and she had to force herself not to run. She walked sedately down the street, nodding to townspeople until she reached the store. Gideon was inside, loading supplies onto the counter. He looked thinner than she remembered and tired. But when he saw her, his whole face changed, lighting up with a smile that made her knees weak. "Eleanor." "Miss Sterling, how have you been?" "I've been well. Teaching keeps me busy. How are you?" "Good. Cold up on the mountain, but I'm managing." They stood awkwardly, surrounded by other shoppers, so much to say and no way to say it. Finally, Gideon said, "Would you like to have dinner with me?" "There's a restaurant down the street. Nothing fancy, but the food's decent." "I'd like that very much." They met at the restaurant an hour later after Eleanor had changed into her best dress and Gideon had secured his supplies. The meal was simple but good, and more importantly, it gave them time to talk without interruption. "Tell me about your students," Gideon said, and Eleanor found herself describing each child with enthusiasm, their struggles and triumphs, their potential. "You love it," he observed. "Teaching." "I do. I feel like I'm making a difference, even if it's small. What about you? How's the mining?" "Slow. Winter makes everything harder, but I've been thinking about what you said about buying land and starting a ranch. There's a property for sale in the valley, good water, decent grazing. I've almost saved enough." "You should do it," Eleanor said earnestly. "You shouldn't spend your life alone on that mountain." "Is that what you think I'm doing? Hiding, aren't you?" Gideon was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe. My parents died, and I felt like the world was too big and too cruel. The mountain felt safer, but lately it just feels empty." "What changed?" He looked directly at her, his dark eyes intense. "You know what changed, Eleanor?" Her breath caught in her throat. Before she could respond, the restaurant door burst open and Sheriff Morrison rushed in, his face grim. "Zim, I need your help. That raider gang hit another wagon train 20 miles east. They've got hostages holed up in an old fort. I'm gathering men to ride out. You're the best tracker I know." Gideon stood immediately. "How many hostages?" "3 women and a child. They're demanding supplies and horses, threatening to kill the hostages if we don't comply." "You can't give them what they want," Gideon said. "They'll kill the hostages anyway." "We need to approach at night, catch them off guard." Eleanor stood as well. "I'm coming with you." Both men turned to stare at her. "Absolutely not," Gideon said firmly. "It's too dangerous. Those could be people from my wagon train. I know what these monsters look like. I can identify them." "You can identify them after we bring them in," Sheriff Morrison said gently. "Miss Sterling, I appreciate your courage, but this is no place for a civilian, especially not a woman." "I'm going," Eleanor repeated, her voice hard. "You can argue with me or we can leave now and save time. Those hostages are running out of time." The 2 men exchanged glances. Finally, Gideon sighed. "If you come, you do exactly what I say when I say it. No arguments." Agreed. They rode out within the hour, a party of 8 men including the sheriff, Gideon, and the town doctor. Eleanor rode a horse borrowed from Judith Morrison, dressed in men's clothing and carrying a rifle she hoped she would not have to use. The ride was hard and fast, covering rough terrain in darkness guided by a half-moon. They reached the old fort just before midnight. It was a crumbling structure from the Mexican War, abandoned for years, with broken walls and a collapsed roof on one side. Light flickered from inside, and they could hear men's voices raised in argument. Gideon scouted the perimeter on foot while the others waited in a dry wash a quarter-mile away. He returned 20 minutes later with a sketch drawn in the dirt. 5 men inside that I could count. The hostages are tied up in the northeast corner. 2 men are guarding them. 3 are near the fire arguing about something. There's a back entrance through the collapsed wall, but it's exposed. We'll need a distraction." Sheriff Morrison considered. "I'll ride up to the front gate, demand they release the hostages. While they're focused on me, you take 3 men through the back. Hit them fast and hard before they can hurt anyone." "Too risky," Gideon said. "They'll shoot you on sight." "Not if they think I've brought what they asked for. We'll load a wagon with supplies, make a show of compliance." They argued tactics for several minutes before settling on a plan. Eleanor was ordered to stay with the horses no matter what happened, a command she agreed to with her fingers crossed behind her back. If things went wrong, she was going in, orders or not. The plan went into motion just before dawn. Sheriff Morrison and 2 deputies approached the fort with a wagon, calling out that they had brought supplies. There was movement inside, voices conferring. Then a man appeared in the entrance, rifle trained on Morrison. "Bring it inside, just you," the raider called. "My men unloaded here. You come get it." While this negotiation continued, Gideon and 3 townsmen crept toward the collapsed wall. Eleanor watched through a gap in the rocks, her heart in her throat. She saw Gideon slip through the opening, disappearing into shadow for a moment. Nothing happened. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from inside the fort, shouts and screams echoing off the stone walls. The raider at the entrance turned to look behind him, and Sheriff Morrison drew his weapon, shooting the man in the shoulder. More shooting. More shouting. Eleanor could not stand it. She grabbed her rifle and ran toward the fort, ignoring the shouts of the men left with the horses. She burst through the entrance to chaos. 3 raiders were down, wounded or dead. A 4th was holding a knife to a woman's throat. using her as a shield while Gideon and the sheriff both had guns trained on him. The fifth raider was nowhere to be seen. "Drop your weapons or I cut her throat," the raider shouted. His face was uncovered now, and Eleanor recognized him. He was the one who had shot Sarah for her wedding ring. "Let her go," Gideon said calmly. "There's no way out of this for you. Let her go and you'll live to see trial." "I ain't hanging. You drop your guns now." Eleanor raised her rifle, her hands steady despite her pounding heart. She had never shot at a person before, had never wanted to kill anyone, but she remembered Sarah's face as she died, remembered the blood on the ground. "You murdered a woman named Sarah," Eleanor said clearly. "You shot her for a piece of jewelry while her children watched. Do you remember that?" The raider's eyes flicked to her, distracted for just a second. It was enough. Gideon moved like lightning, crossing the space and striking the man's arm. The knife fell, and the hostage scrambled away. Within seconds, the raider was on the ground with Gideon's knee in his back and handcuffs being snapped onto his wrists. The missing fifth raider was found trying to flee on foot and was quickly captured. The hostages, shaken but alive, were freed and given water and blankets. Eleanor helped the doctor treat the wounded, her hands steady despite the horror around her. As dawn broke fully, Gideon found Eleanor sitting on a broken wall staring at the mountains. He sat beside her without speaking. "I could have killed him," Eleanor said quietly. "I wanted to, but you didn't. You held your fire and trusted me to do my job. That took more courage than shooting would have. Does it get easier? The violence, the death? No, and you should pray it never does." They sat in silence as the sun rose, painting the snow-covered peaks gold and pink. The prisoners were being loaded into the wagon, the hostages prepared for the journey back to Montrose. It was over, but Eleanor knew she would never forget this night. The ride back to town was slow, accommodating the injured and traumatized. Eleanor rode beside one of the rescued women, a young mother named Catherine whose daughter had been taken in the raid. The girl, no more than 5 years old, clung to her mother with desperate strength. "They said they'd sell her," Catherine whispered to Eleanor. "Said she'd fetch a good price in Mexico. I thought I'd never see her again." Eleanor took Catherine's hand and held it tight, offering what comfort she could. She caught Gideon watching her and saw respect in his eyes, something deeper than mere admiration. By the time they reached Montrose, the whole town had turned out. News of the rescue had preceded them, and people lined the street cheering. But Eleanor felt no triumph, only exhaustion and a bone-deep weariness with violence. Sheriff Morrison insisted that everyone involved come to his house for food and rest before making statements. Judith Morrison had prepared enough food for an army, and the house was soon full of people eating, talking, reliving the night's events. Eleanor slipped out onto the back porch, needing quiet. She stood in the cold air, letting it clear her head when the door opened behind her. Gideon stepped out, closing it gently. "You should be inside resting," he said. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see that man's face. I see Sarah dying, I see all of it." Gideon moved closer, his warmth a counterpoint to the winter air. "It will fade with time, not disappear, but fade. You'll learn to carry it." "How do you know?" "My parents died of cholera. I watched them suffer, unable to help. For a long time, I couldn't close my eyes without seeing them. But eventually, I started remembering the good times too. The memories became balanced instead of only painful." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "Is that why you went to the mountain? To escape the memories?" "Partly. But also because I felt like I'd failed them. They gave me everything, and I couldn't save them when it mattered." "You couldn't have saved them, Gideon. Disease doesn't care about love or effort. I know that now. Took me years to accept it, but I know it." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You helped me see that. You survived something terrible, but instead of hiding from life, you're building a new one. Teaching children, helping people. You're the bravest person I've ever met." "I don't feel brave. I feel scared all the time." "That's what makes you brave, being scared and doing it anyway." They stood close together in the cold, and Eleanor became acutely aware of every detail. The way Gideon's eyes reflected the porch light, the warmth of his hand still resting against her cheek, the rapid beating of her own heart. "Gideon, I need to tell you something. I'm listening." "I don't want you to go back to the mountain." His hand stilled. "Eleanor, I know I have no right to ask. We barely know each other. But the thought of you up there alone, spending another winter in that cabin, it makes my heart hurt. I want you here in town, near me." "Do you know what you're saying?" His voice was rough with emotion. "I'm saying I care about you, more than I should after such a short time. I'm saying that when I think about the future, I see you in it. If that's too much, if I'm being foolish, tell me now and I'll never mention it again." Instead of answering with words, Gideon cupped her face in both hands and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, asking permission. Eleanor answered by wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him back with all the longing she had been carrying since that first night in his cabin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "I've been in love with you since you fell through my door in a ruined wedding dress. I just didn't think I had the right to say it." "Why wouldn't you have the right? You're educated, cultured, meant for better than a mountain hermit who digs in the dirt for gold. You're also educated, kind, talented, and the best man I've ever met. I don't care about gold or status, Gideon. I care about you." He kissed her again, longer this time, and Eleanor felt warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the cold. When they broke apart, Gideon was smiling, truly smiling in a way she had never seen before. "I bought that land," he said. "Signed the papers this morning before the sheriff came looking for me. 200 acres in the valley with a good water source and timber for building. I was going to tell you at dinner. You bought it, but I thought you needed more time to save. I've had enough for a while now. I was just scared to take the step. But then I met you, and suddenly hiding on the mountain seemed like the cowardice it was. I want to build something, Eleanor. A ranch, a home, a life." He paused, then added quietly, "I want to build it with you if you'll have me." "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking you to marry me. I know it's fast, I know we should wait longer, be more sensible. But life is short and uncertain, and I don't want to waste another day without you. So yes, Eleanor Sterling, I'm asking you to be my wife." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." They kissed again, and this time when they broke apart, Judith Morrison was standing in the doorway with a knowing smile. "I thought I might find you two out here. Congratulations. Now get inside before you both freeze to death." The news of their engagement spread through Montrose like wildfire. Some people thought it was too fast, too scandalous. But most were happy for the quiet miner and the brave teacher who had found each other against such odds. Judith Morrison took charge of wedding plans with enthusiasm, insisting that Eleanor should have a proper ceremony even if they were in a hurry to marry. "The church is being renovated," Judith said as they sat planning a few days later. "It won't be ready until spring. But there's that little chapel up in the mountains. It's old, built by Spanish missionaries decades ago. Most people don't use it anymore because it's so remote, but it's beautiful." "Where is it?" Eleanor asked. "About 5 miles north of Gideon's cabin in a high meadow. I remember seeing it years ago when Morrison and I first came to Colorado. It's small, stone, with the most beautiful carved doors. If we can reach it in this weather, it would be perfect." Gideon was consulted and agreed immediately. I know the chapel. It's still sound, maintained by an old Mexican family who lives nearby. If Eleanor wants to marry there, I'll make it happen. They set the date for Christmas Eve, just 2 weeks away. It would be a small ceremony, just immediate friends and whoever could make the journey up the mountain. Judith helped Eleanor sew a new dress. Simple white, wool-lined with warm flannel, practical but beautiful. The days leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor continued teaching, not wanting to leave her students without instruction, while Gideon worked on his new property, beginning to clear land for a house. They saw each other every evening, stealing moments alone when they could, planning their future together. I want at least 4 children, Eleanor said one night as they sat by the fire in the Morrisons' parlor. 4, that's quite specific. I was an only child. It was lonely. I want our children to have siblings, to always have someone. 4 it is then. Though I should warn you, I'm hoping for at least one girl who looks exactly like her mother. Eleanor blushed and kissed him. I think we can arrange that. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and crystal-clear skies. A party of 15 set out from Montrose before dawn. The bride and groom, the Morrisons, the doctor and his wife, several of Eleanor's students and their parents, and the circuit preacher who happened to be in town. They traveled on horseback and in 2 sturdy wagons, carrying food and supplies for a celebration. The journey took most of the day, following paths that Gideon knew well. Eleanor rode beside him, warm in her layers of wool and fur, watching the landscape transform as they climbed. The mountains were magnificent in winter, stark and beautiful, dangerous and sublime. As the sun began to set, painting the snow gold and pink, they reached the high meadow. The chapel rose before them like something from a fairy tale. Old stone covered in snow, carved wooden doors, decorated with images of saints and angels. Smoke rose from a small house nearby, where the caretaker family lived. An elderly Mexican man came out to greet them, his face creasing in a wide smile. "Welcome, welcome. We got word you were coming. Everything is ready." The chapel interior was simple but beautiful, with wooden pews and a small altar. Someone had decorated with pine branches and candles, making the space warm and inviting. The caretaker's wife had started a fire in the small stove, and the chapel was blessedly warm. Eleanor changed into her wedding dress in the caretaker's house, helped by Judith and several of the other women. When she looked at herself in the small mirror, she saw not a frightened girl in a ruined dress, but a woman ready to start a new life. "You look beautiful," Judith said, tears in her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud." Eleanor touched the Bible in her satchel, the one possession that had survived everything. "I like to think she's watching somehow. She would have loved Gideon. Everyone who meets him loves him. You're a lucky woman. I know." As the sun set completely and stars began to appear, Eleanor walked through the snow to the chapel. The doors stood open, golden light spilling out. Gideon waited at the altar, dressed in his best suit, his eyes fixed on the entrance. When he saw her, his expression transformed with wonder and love. Eleanor walked down the short aisle alone, having no one to give her away. But she did not feel alone. She felt the presence of everyone who had shaped her life, her parents who had raised her to be strong and independent, the women on the wagon train who had shown her courage in the face of death, and most of all, the man waiting for her at the altar who had shown her that love could still exist in a harsh world. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. The preacher spoke of love and commitment, of the sacred bond between husband and wife. When he asked if anyone objected to the union, only silence answered. When he invited Gideon to speak his vows, The cowboy took Eleanor's hands in his and spoke words he had clearly prepared. "Eleanor, you came into my life during a storm, and you brought light to my darkness. I was living half a life before you, hiding from the world and from myself. You made me want to be brave again, to build something lasting. I promise to love you every day, to protect you and provide for you, to be the partner you deserve. I promise to never let you feel alone or unloved." And most of all, he added with a smile, remembering the night she had stumbled into his cabin, "I promise to never let you feel cold." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears at the beautiful simplicity of his words. When it was her turn, she said, "Gideon, you saved my life, but more than that, you gave me a reason to live again. You showed me kindness when I had every reason to expect cruelty. You loved me when I felt unlovable. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams and build new ones with you. I promise to fill your life with warmth and laughter, to give you the family and home you deserve. I promise to love you not just today, but every day for the rest of our lives." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Gideon kissed his bride, the small congregation erupted in cheers. Eleanor felt joy so pure and complete that she thought her heart might burst. They celebrated with the food everyone had brought, simple fare that tasted like a feast. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the small chapel while snow fell gently outside. Eleanor danced with her husband, with Sheriff Morrison, with the doctor, with her students. She danced until her feet ached and her cheeks hurt from smiling. As the celebration wound down and people began preparing to make camp for the night, Gideon pulled Eleanor aside. "I have something to show you." He led her outside where Otis waited with a small sleigh attached. "The caretaker keeps it for winter travel. He's letting us borrow it for the night. Our cabin isn't far." "Our cabin," Eleanor repeated, loving the sound of it. They said goodnight to their friends and set off through the moonlit snow. The sleigh glided smoothly, and Eleanor huddled against Gideon under a thick bearskin, watching the stars wheel overhead. The world felt magical, transformed by snow and love and the promise of a shared future. Gideon's cabin appeared through the trees, smoke rising from the chimney. "I asked the caretaker's son to come up earlier and get the fire going. I wanted it to be warm for you." He helped her down from the sleigh and lifted her in his arms, carrying her over the threshold just as tradition demanded. Eleanor laughed with pure joy, wrapping her arms around his neck. Inside, the cabin was transformed. Someone, probably Judith Morrison, had decorated with pine branches and ribbon. The bed was made with fresh linens, and a small table was set with bread, cheese, and wine. Candles burned throughout the space, making everything soft and romantic. "It's perfect," Eleanor breathed. Gideon set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "You're perfect. I can't believe you're my wife." "Believe it, cowboy. You're stuck with me now." They made love for the first time as the fire burned low and snow fell silently outside. Eleanor had been nervous, uncertain what to expect, but Gideon was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally lay tangled together afterward, both breathless and amazed, Eleanor felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you too. More than words can say." They spent 2 days in the cabin, a honeymoon in the wilderness. Gideon showed Eleanor his mining operation, explaining the work with obvious affection for the mountain that had sheltered him for so long. Eleanor told him stories about her students, her dreams for the school, her hopes for their future. "Will you keep teaching after we're married?" Gideon asked as they sat by the fire on their second evening. "If you don't mind. I know wives usually stay home, but I love teaching." "At least until we have children." "I don't mind at all. You're brilliant with those kids. It would be a crime to waste that gift. He paused, then added, though I'll admit I'm selfish enough to want you to myself sometimes. I think we can arrange that, Eleanor said with a smile that made him pull her into his arms. They returned to Montrose after Christmas, moving into a small house the town council provided for the teacher. It was temporary, just until Gideon could build their real home on the new property, but Eleanor loved it. She loved waking up next to her husband, preparing breakfast together, walking to school while he went to work on the land. Gideon threw himself into building with an energy Eleanor had never seen from him before. He hired 2 local men to help, and together they began constructing a house that would be large enough for the family they planned. Eleanor visited the site every day after school, watching walls rise and a roof take shape. "It's going to be beautiful," she said one afternoon in late January, standing in what would become their kitchen. "Wait until you see it finished. There will be a big kitchen for you, a parlor with space for my violin and your books, 3 bedrooms upstairs, and a study where you can prepare your lessons." And, he added with pride, a proper bathtub. No more heating water in a kettle. "Gideon Zimmerman, you're spoiling me." "That's the plan, Mrs. Zimmerman." Eleanor never tired of hearing her married name. She signed it on every document, savored it every time someone addressed her. She was no longer alone in the world, no longer the orphan girl with no real home. She was Eleanor Zimmerman, wife and teacher, building a life in the Colorado mountains. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and revealing green grass beneath. Gideon's house neared completion, a beautiful 2-story structure with white clapboard siding and green shutters. They moved in on a warm day in April, carrying furniture and belongings with help from half the town. That night, they sat on their front porch watching the sun set over the valley, Gideon's arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible. You?" "Beyond measure." He paused, then added, "I sold the mining claim, got a good price for it, enough to buy cattle and start the ranch properly. I'm done with that mountain. No regrets. Not a single one. That was my past. This is my future." Eleanor turned to kiss him, and as she did, she felt a familiar flutter in her abdomen. She had been waiting to be sure before telling him, but now seemed like the perfect moment. "Gideon, I have something to tell you." He heard the seriousness in her tone and turned to face her fully. "What is it?" "We're going to have a baby. I'm about 3 months along. The doctor confirmed it yesterday." For a moment, Gideon just stared at her, processing the words. Then his face broke into the widest smile Eleanor had ever seen. He let out a whoop of joy and lifted her in his arms, spinning her around. "We're having a baby. Eleanor, we're having a baby. Careful, you'll make me dizzy," she laughed. But she was crying too, overwhelmed with happiness. They sat back down, Gideon's hand immediately going to her still flat stomach. "When?" "Late September, the doctor thinks. Right around harvest time. A harvest baby, I love it. Boy or girl, do you think? I have no idea. But healthy, I hope. That's all that matters." "Healthy," Gideon agreed. "Though I still hope for a girl with your eyes and your smile." The months passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor continued teaching until mid-August, when her growing belly made it difficult to manage the classroom. The town council hired a temporary replacement and assured her the position would be waiting when she was ready to return. Gideon finished building the barn and bought 20 head of cattle, the beginning of what he hoped would be a thriving ranch. He hired a ranch hand to help with the work, a young man named Timothy who lived in a small bunkhouse Gideon built behind the barn. In late September, as the aspen trees turned gold and the air grew crisp with approaching autumn, Eleanor went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Gideon stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. When their son finally arrived, screaming and red-faced and perfect, Gideon wept. He held the tiny body with shaking hands, marveling at the miracle of new life. "He's beautiful," he whispered. "You're beautiful. Eleanor, thank you for this gift." Eleanor, exhausted but glowing with joy, smiled at her husband. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son's face, Gideon knew immediately. "Samuel, after your father." "Samuel Zimmerman," Eleanor said softly. "It's perfect." Life with a newborn was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Gideon proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel during colicky nights, changing diapers without complaint, singing German lullabies his mother had taught him. Eleanor marveled at the depth of his love, the way he transformed from stoic cowboy to doting parent. "You're a natural," she told him one evening as he rocked Samuel to sleep. "I just remember what my parents did, how safe they made me feel. I want that for him." As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Gideon built a reputation as an honest dealer with quality cattle. The herd grew, and he had to hire 2 more ranch hands to help manage the work. Eleanor returned to teaching part-time, bringing Samuel with her to school where he charmed the older students who competed to help watch him. When Samuel was 2, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she hoped for that girl Gideon had wished for. In June, she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. She had Gideon's dark eyes and Eleanor's delicate features, and her father was helplessly smitten from the moment he saw her. "I'm outnumbered now," Gideon joked as he held Grace while Samuel climbed on his lap. 3 against 1. "You love it," Eleanor said. "I do, I really do." The years passed in a warm blur of happiness. Samuel grew tall and strong, helping his father with ranch work as soon as he was old enough. Grace was quieter than her brother, preferring books to horses, but she had a fierce spirit that reminded everyone of her mother. When Samuel was 5 and Grace was 3, Eleanor gave birth to twin boys, Robert and James, completing their family. 4 children, just like you wanted," Gideon said as he juggled both twins while Eleanor nursed baby James. "Are you complaining, Mr. Zimmerman?" "Not for a second, Mrs. Zimmerman." The house was always full of noise and laughter. Gideon taught the children to ride, to care for animals, to appreciate the land that sustained them. Eleanor taught them to read and write, to think critically, to value education. Together, they taught their children kindness, honesty, and the importance of family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gideon took Eleanor back to the chapel where they had married. It was summer now, and the meadow was filled with wildflowers. They stood hand in hand in the same spot where they had exchanged vows, older now, marked by life but deeper in love than ever. 10 years, Eleanor marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times I can barely remember life before you." "I can't remember it at all, or rather, I don't want to. That cold, lonely man on the mountain doesn't exist anymore. You made me real, Eleanor. You made me whole." "We made each other whole," she corrected. "I was running away from life when I stumbled into your cabin. I thought I wanted independence, adventure, but what I really wanted was a home. You gave me that." They renewed their vows there in the meadow, just the 2 of them, speaking promises that were deeper and truer than the ones they had made as young lovers. They promised to continue choosing each other every day, to weather life's storms together, to grow old side by side. As they walked back to their horses, Eleanor said, "Remember your promise on our wedding day, that you'd never let me feel cold. I remember. You've kept that promise every single day, not just physically, but in here." She touched her heart. "You've kept me warm with your love, your support, your partnership. I've never felt alone since the day I married you." Gideon pulled her close and kissed her tenderly. "And I never will let you feel that way. That's a promise I'll keep until my last breath." They rode home to their children, to their ranch, to the life they had built together from snow and desperation and hope. That evening, as Eleanor stood on the porch watching Gideon teach the twins to rope a fence post while Samuel helped, and Grace read in a nearby hammock, she felt profound gratitude for the path that had led her here. She thought about the girl she had been, freezing and desperate, stumbling through the snow in a ruined wedding dress. She thought about the outlaws who had set her on this path, the people who had died. The memories still hurt, but they were balanced now by everything that had come after. The pain had not disappeared, but it had been transformed into something meaningful. Sheriff Morrison and his wife visited often, delighted by their honorary grandchildren. Judith never tired of reminding everyone that she had predicted the match from the beginning. "I saw it in the way you looked at each other," she would say. "You can't fake that kind of connection." The town of Montrose grew and prospered alongside the Zimmerman family. Eleanor became the permanent head of the school, eventually training younger teachers to help her. Gideon's ranch expanded until it was one of the largest in the valley. But he never lost his simple, honest approach to life and business. One winter evening, when the children were all in bed and snow fell softly outside, Eleanor and Gideon sat by the fire much as they had on that first night in his cabin. Gideon played his violin, the same instrument his mother had taught him on, filling the house with bittersweet melody. When he finished, Eleanor said, "Play the song from our wedding." Gideon obliged, and Eleanor closed her eyes, transported back to that small chapel buried in snow, to the moment when her life had truly begun. When the last note faded, she opened her eyes to find Gideon watching her with that same expression he had worn when she walked down the aisle, wonder and love and deep contentment. "I love you, Eleanor Zimmerman. I love you, Gideon Zimmerman. Today, tomorrow, always." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in white. But inside the house Gideon had built, inside the life they had created together, there was only warmth. The years continued to roll by, each one adding new layers to their story. Samuel, their eldest, grew into a young man with his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind. At 18, he surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to study law rather than take over the ranch. "I love this place," he told his parents at dinner one night. "But I want to help people the way Sheriff Morrison did. I want to make sure justice is served, that families don't suffer like you did, Ma." Eleanor looked at Gideon, who nodded slowly. "If that's your calling, son, we support you. The ranch will be here when you're ready to come back. Or not, if you choose a different path." Samuel left for Denver that fall to study law, and though Eleanor cried to see him go, she was proud of the man he had become. Grace, now 16, took over his role as her father's right hand, proving that she could rope and ride as well as any man despite her love of books. "She'll make her own path too," Gideon told Eleanor one night. "They all will. We raised them to be independent. I know. It's just hard to let them grow up. We still have the twins," he reminded her. "Robert and James are only 11. We've got plenty of time before they leave us." But time moved faster than either of them wanted. Before they knew it, the twins were graduating from Eleanor's school, both planning to work the ranch alongside their father. Grace shocked everyone by falling in love with a traveling photographer who stopped in Montrose for a week and never left. They married in the same chapel where Eleanor and Gideon had wed, with Grace wearing her mother's dress carefully preserved all these years. "She's so young," Eleanor worried as they prepared for the wedding. "Only 19. Is she ready?" Gideon smiled and took his wife's hands. "How old were you when we married?" 19. But that was different. Was it? We barely knew each other. We'd survived a crisis together, yes, but we didn't know if we'd last. We chose to take a chance on love, and it was the best decision either of us ever made. Let Grace make her own choice. Eleanor hugged her husband tightly. When did you become so wise? I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention. Grace's wedding was a joyful celebration, and her husband Thomas proved to be a good man who adored her. They settled in Montrose, where Thomas opened a photography studio and Grace helped Eleanor at the school while pursuing her own dream of writing. Within a year, they made Eleanor and Gideon grandparents with the birth of a daughter they named Eleanor. I'm a grandmother, Eleanor said in wonder, holding tiny Eleanor for the first time. How did this happen? Time is cruel that way, Gideon said, but he was smiling as he looked over her shoulder at his granddaughter. She's beautiful, just like the woman she's named after. Samuel returned from Denver 2 years later with a law degree and a wife, a quiet woman named Anna who worked as a school teacher like Eleanor had. They moved back to Montrose, where Samuel set up a small law practice focused on helping people who couldn't afford expensive attorneys. The twins, Robert and James, both married local girls within months of each other and brought their brides to live on the ranch. Gideon divided the land among his sons, creating 3 separate parcels that would allow each family to build their own future while staying close to one another. It's what I always wanted, he told Eleanor as they watched the twins break ground on their houses. Family close by, working the land together, building something that will last. Eleanor leaned against her husband, marveling at how full their lives had become. The desperate girl who had stumbled through the snow seemed like someone from another lifetime, though she could still remember that bone-deep cold when she tried. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. The house and barn were decorated with lanterns, tables laden with food. It seemed like the whole town had turned out, eager to celebrate the couple who had become pillars of the community. Sheriff Morrison, now retired and gray-haired but still sharp as ever, gave a toast. 25 years ago, I met a young woman who had survived the impossible and a young man who had saved her life. I knew right then they were meant for each other, not because of some romantic notion, but because I saw 2 people who made each other better. Gideon came down from his mountain and joined the world again because of Eleanor. Eleanor found the strength to build a new life because of Gideon. They've shown us all what love should look like: partnership, respect, devotion, and joy. Here's to 25 more years. Everyone cheered and drank, and Eleanor found herself crying happy tears. Gideon pulled her close and whispered, "No tears on our anniversary. These are good tears. I'm just overwhelmed by how blessed we are." That night, after all the guests had left and the children had gone to their own homes, Eleanor and Gideon sat on their porch watching the stars. The valley spread before them, dotted with lights from the houses of their children, the town of Montrose glowing softly in the distance. "Do you ever think about that night?" Eleanor asked. "When I showed up at your cabin?" "Sometimes." "Do you?" "All the time. I think about how easily I could have died. If the storm had been worse, if I'd gone in a different direction, if you hadn't been home. So many things had to align perfectly for us to find each other." "Fate," Gideon said simply. "You believe in fate." "I didn't used to, but how else do you explain it? You walked through a blizzard in a wedding dress and ended up at exactly the right door. If that's not fate, I don't know what is." Eleanor considered this. Maybe it was, or maybe we just got very lucky. Either way, I'm grateful for it every single day. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the night deepen around them. Inside the house, the clock struck midnight, marking the official end of their anniversary. But the celebration of their love continued as it had for 25 years, as it would for all the years to come. More years passed, bringing changes inevitable with time. Sheriff Morrison died peacefully in his sleep at age 75, and Eleanor wept at his funeral, remembering the kindness he and Judith had shown her. Judith followed her husband 6 months later, and Eleanor felt the loss deeply. They had been like parents to her, filling the void left by her own family. Gideon's hair turned silver, and Eleanor's showed more gray than brown. Their bodies moved slower, complained more, but their love remained constant. They adapted to the changes, finding new ways to show affection, new rhythms for their days. When Gideon turned 55, he officially retired from active ranch work, turning over daily operations to the twins. He spent his time woodworking, creating beautiful furniture for his growing brood of grandchildren, and playing his violin every evening. Eleanor finally retired from teaching at 60, training her replacement carefully and staying on as a consultant. She spent her newfound free time writing a book about the early days of Montrose, including the story of the wagon train attack and the rescue that had followed. The book became a local treasure, copied and distributed throughout Colorado. Their 30th anniversary was quieter than the 25th, just family gathered for dinner. But it was no less meaningful. Each child stood and spoke about what their parents' marriage had taught them, how it had shaped their own relationships. Samuel, now a respected attorney with 3 children of his own, said, "You taught me that real strength is gentle. Dad, I watched you care for Ma through every pregnancy, every sickness, with such tenderness. You showed me that being a man doesn't mean being hard or distant. It means being present and caring." Grace, pregnant with her 4th child, added, "You taught me to follow my dreams while staying true to my roots. Ma, you continued teaching even after having children. You showed me that being a mother doesn't mean giving up yourself. And Dad, you supported her in that, never demanding she be something she wasn't." Robert and James spoke together, as they often did, finishing each other's sentences. They talked about partnership, about working together toward common goals, about the importance of choosing a spouse who was also a friend. By the end of the evening, both Eleanor and Gideon were in tears. "We didn't know we were teaching anything," Eleanor said. "We were just trying to figure it out as we went." "That's exactly what you taught us," Samuel said. "That marriage is work, but it's worth it. That you don't have to be perfect, just committed." As they approached their 40th anniversary, life slowed even more. Gideon's joints ached with arthritis and he walked with a cane. Eleanor's eyesight weakened, requiring spectacles for reading. But they adapted, finding joy in simpler things. Morning coffee on the porch, evenings reading aloud to each other, visits from their ever-growing family. They had 14 grandchildren now, with 3 more on the way. The ranch had expanded to cover nearly 1,000 acres, split among their sons but still unified in spirit. The Zimmerman name was known throughout Colorado as synonymous with honest dealing and quality cattle. On their 40th anniversary, the children wanted to throw a big party, but Eleanor and Gideon declined. Instead, they asked for something specific, a trip back to the chapel where they had married. "We're old," Grace protested. "That's a hard journey." "We'll manage," Gideon said firmly. "I want to stand in that place one more time with your mother." So in late December, with half their family following behind in case of emergency, Eleanor and Gideon made the journey up the mountain. The trip that had once taken half a day now took 2, with frequent stops for rest. But finally, on the afternoon of their anniversary, they reached the meadow. The chapel stood as it had 40 years ago, weathered but still sound. The caretaker family still maintained it, now led by the grandson of the man who had welcomed them on their wedding day. Snow covered everything, making the world pure and perfect. Eleanor and Gideon entered the chapel alone, leaving their family outside. Inside, little had changed. The same simple altar, the same wooden pews. Candles had been lit in preparation for their arrival, casting gentle light throughout the space. 40 years, Eleanor said softly. It's been a good life, hasn't it? The best life, Gideon agreed. Better than I ever imagined possible. They stood at the altar where they had exchanged vows, and Gideon took Eleanor's weathered hands in his. I've kept my promise, haven't I? You haven't been cold. Eleanor smiled through her tears. Not for a single day. You've kept me warm in every way that matters. You've been my shelter, my home, my heart. Do you remember what you said to me that first night? You said you hated to impose. And you said I wasn't a burden. You never were. You were a gift, Eleanor. You still are. Every morning I wake up beside you as a gift. They renewed their vows there, speaking words that needed no preacher to make them binding. They promised, as they had 40 years before, to love each other until their last breath. But these promises carried the weight of decades lived, of challenges overcome, of a love that had been tested and proven true. When they emerged from the chapel, their family cheered. A celebration followed at the caretaker's house, warmed by the same wood stove that had heated the chapel on their wedding day. There was food and wine and stories, laughter echoing across the snow-covered meadow. As the sun set, Gideon pulled out his violin and played. His fingers were stiff with age, not as nimble as they once were, but the music was still beautiful. He played the song from their wedding, and Eleanor closed her eyes, transported back through 4 decades to the scared girl and lonely man who had found each other in a storm. They returned home the next day, exhausted but happy. Life settled back into its gentle rhythm, mornings on the porch, afternoons with grandchildren, evenings by the fire. They talked often about the past, remembering their life together, marveling at how far they had come. Sometimes I dream about that night, Eleanor told Gideon one evening. The night I walked through the snow. Only in my dreams I don't find your cabin. I just keep walking until I disappear into white. But you did find it, Gideon reminded her gently. You found me and I found you, and everything else followed from that moment. I know, but it reminds me how fragile everything is, how easily our whole life could have never happened. But it did happen, and we've lived it fully. No regrets, remember, no regrets, Eleanor agreed. More time passed, measured now in seasons rather than years. Spring brought wildflowers and new calves. Summer meant family gatherings and work in the garden Eleanor still maintained with help from her grandchildren. Fall brought harvest and preparation for winter. And winter brought peace, quietness, time to rest and reflect. They were in their mid-70s now, old by the standards of the frontier, though not impossibly so. Modern medicine had come to Montrose, along with telegraph lines and eventually even talk of electricity. The world was changing, moving faster, but Eleanor and Gideon preferred their slower pace. One winter evening, as snow fell softly outside, Gideon felt a pain in his chest. It was sharp and frightening, stealing his breath. Eleanor saw his face pale and immediately sent for the doctor. The doctor came quickly and examined Gideon thoroughly. His diagnosis was not good. Gideon's heart was failing. There was little that could be done except make him comfortable and wait. How long? Eleanor asked, her voice steady though her hands shook. Could be weeks, could be months. He should rest, avoid excitement, and make his peace with things. After the doctor left, Eleanor sat beside Gideon on their bed, holding his hand. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Gideon said, I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm afraid of leaving you alone. You won't leave me alone. You'll never leave me alone. You'll always be in my heart, in my memories, in our children and their children. You'll be everywhere I look. I wanted more time. We've had 40 wonderful years, my love. That's more than most people get. We've built a beautiful life together. We have nothing to regret. No regrets, Gideon agreed, echoing the promise they had made to each other so long ago. The family was summoned and the house filled with children and grandchildren. They took turns sitting with Gideon, sharing memories, saying things that needed to be said. He gave each person his blessing, sharing wisdom and love in equal measure. "Take care of your mother," he told Samuel. "She's stronger than she seems, but she'll need family close by." "Dad, she's not going to be alone. We'll all take care of her." To Grace he said, "Keep writing. Your words matter. People need to know the stories of how we lived, how we loved." To the twins he said, "The land will sustain you if you respect it. Don't be greedy, don't be cruel. Build something worth passing on." To each grandchild he offered words of encouragement, wisdom, and love. And through it all, Eleanor sat beside him, her hand in his, providing the same steady presence she had given for 40 years. On a quiet evening 3 weeks after the doctor's diagnosis, as snow fell heavy outside, Gideon's breathing changed. Eleanor knew the end was near. She sent someone to fetch the family, but she also knew they might not arrive in time. She lay down beside her husband on the bed, curling against him as she had done 10,000 times before. His arm came around her, still strong despite his failing heart. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here with you, I know." His voice was faint but peaceful. "Eleanor, my love, my life, thank you for everything. Thank you for keeping your promise. You never let me feel cold, not once in 40 years. I'll keep you warm even after I'm gone. You know that, don't you? My love will keep you warm forever." The family arrived as the sun set, filling the room with quiet presence. They formed a circle around the bed, children and grandchildren, bearing witness to the ending of a great love story. Gideon's breathing grew shallower, each breath more labored than the last, but his hand never left Eleanor's and his eyes remained focused on her face. "I see the chapel," he whispered. "The meadow, the snow, you walking toward me in that white dress. You were so beautiful, Eleanor, you still are. I love you, Gideon Zimmerman. I love you, Eleanor Zimmerman. Today, tomorrow, always." Those were his last words. His breath stopped, his hand went still, but his face held peace. Eleanor held him for a long time, not crying, just memorizing the feel of him one last time. Finally, Samuel gently pulled her away and Grace wrapped a blanket around her mother's shoulders. Eleanor looked at her children, seeing their tears, and found the strength to comfort them. "He lived a good life," she said firmly. "He loved and was loved. He leaves behind a legacy of kindness and hard work and devotion. We should celebrate that, not just mourn." The funeral was held in the Montrose church, packed with people whose lives Gideon had touched. The preacher spoke of his generosity, his honesty, his devotion to family. But it was Eleanor who gave the final words. She stood at the front of the church, straight and strong despite her grief, and told the story of their meeting. She told how a desperate girl in a ruined wedding dress had stumbled through a snowstorm and found salvation in a lonely man's cabin. She told how that man had promised to never let her feel cold, and how he had kept that promise every day of their marriage. "Gideon Zimmerman was a simple man with simple values," Eleanor said. "He believed in honest work, fair dealing, and the power of love. He showed me that strength and gentleness can exist in the same person. He taught our children what it means to be honorable, and our grandchildren what it means to be kind. His body is gone, but his spirit lives on in every life he touched. And I promise you this, I will never feel cold again, because his love still warms me. It always will." There was not a dry eye in the church when she finished. Eleanor buried her husband in the Montrose Cemetery on a hillside overlooking the valley. The headstone was simple, bearing his name, dates, and a single line. He kept his promise. The weeks after Gideon's death were hard. Eleanor felt his absence in every moment, every space. The house was too quiet, the bed too empty, but she had meant what she said about his love keeping her warm. She could feel him in the life they had built, in the faces of their children, in the music that still played in her memory. Spring came, as it always did, bringing green grass and new life. Eleanor planted flowers on Gideon's grave and spent hours there, talking to him, telling him about the family news. The grandchildren visited often, and she found comfort in their presence. Grace published her book that summer, a collection of stories about Colorado pioneers. The dedication read, "For my parents who showed me what love looks like." Eleanor read it through tears, proud beyond measure. Samuel won a case that changed labor law in Colorado, protecting minors from exploitation. He named the law after his father, ensuring Gideon's name would be remembered beyond their family. The twins expanded the ranch, using sustainable practices their father had pioneered. They taught their children the same lessons Gideon had taught them: respect the land, care for your animals, deal honestly with others. Eleanor lived for 5 more years after Gideon's death. They were good years, filled with family and purpose. She saw more grandchildren born, watched the older ones marry and start families of their own. She taught one last generation of Montrose children to read and write, working part-time at the school she had served for decades. But as she approached her 80th birthday, Eleanor felt herself fading. There was no specific illness, just a gradual winding down. The doctor said her heart was simply worn out, tired from 8 decades of beating. Her children gathered around her as she had gathered around Gideon. They sat in the house he had built, surrounded by the furniture he had made, and they told stories. "Remember when Dad taught me to ride," Samuel said, "and I fell off and was too scared to get back on. He picked me up, dusted me off, and said courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing it anyway." That lesson shaped my whole life. He used to play the violin for me when I couldn't sleep, Grace remembered. I'd lie in bed listening to the music float up through the house, and I always felt so safe. He never raised his voice in anger, Robert said. Not once. Even when James and I broke the barn window playing ball, he just calmly explained why we needed to be more careful. Then he taught us how to replace the glass ourselves. Eleanor listened to these stories with joy. This was Gideon's real legacy, not the land or the money, but these memories of kindness and patience and love. On her last evening, as the sun set over the valley in brilliant orange and pink, Eleanor asked to be moved to the porch. Her family gathered around her, 3 generations of Zimmermans, all owing their existence to that snowy night so long ago. "I'm ready," Eleanor said clearly. "I've lived a full life, loved and been loved. I'm ready to see your father again." "We'll miss you, Ma," Samuel said through tears. "And I'll miss you. But I'll be with you always, just like your father is. In your hearts, in your memories, in your children's faces. We're never really gone as long as we're remembered." As darkness fell, Eleanor felt a familiar warmth spreading through her. She looked up and saw Gideon standing at the edge of the porch, young again, smiling, extending his hand to her. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "I never felt cold. Are you ready to come home?" he asked, his voice clear as it had been on their wedding day. "I'm ready." Eleanor closed her eyes and took her last breath, her hand resting in Samuel's, her heart full of peace. The family wept, but they also celebrated, knowing she had died as she had lived, surrounded by love. They buried Eleanor beside Gideon on the hillside, their graves side by side, facing the valley they had helped build. Eleanor's headstone matched his in simplicity, bearing her name, dates, and a single line. She kept him warm. The story of Eleanor and Gideon Zimmerman became legend in Montrose. Parents told their children about the brave teacher and the kind cowboy who had married in a chapel, buried in snow. They told how he had promised to never let her feel cold, and how that promise had shaped a lifetime of devotion. The chapel where they married became a destination for couples, who came from all over Colorado to exchange vows in the same place where such a beautiful love story had begun. The meadow filled with wildflowers every summer, and people said it was Eleanor and Gideon's love still blooming. Their descendants prospered, spreading throughout Colorado and beyond, but always remembering their roots. The ranch remained in the family for generations, and above the main house's fireplace hung a portrait of Eleanor and Gideon taken on their 25th anniversary. In it, they stood close together, hands clasped, eyes filled with love. Beneath the portrait was a plaque bearing the words that had defined their life together. He promised to never let her feel cold, and he never did. And in the winter, when snow fell on the valley and wind howled through the mountains, the people of Montrose would gather around their fires and remember. They remembered the girl in the ruined wedding dress who had refused to surrender to the cold. They remembered the lonely man who had opened his door and his heart. They remembered the love that had grown from desperation and hope, the family that had sprung from that love, the legacy that continued to shape their community. Because Eleanor and Gideon Zimmerman had shown them all something essential. That love could bloom in the harshest conditions, that promises made with a true heart could last forever, and that the warmth of devotion could overcome any cold. Their story became part of the valley itself, as enduring as the mountains, as essential as the snow, as warm as the promise that bound them. "I'll never let you feel cold,"